Hello there, people of the internet. Today I have a fun little story for you. Well, I guess it's gonna end up being two stories, because technically it's two stories, but they both fall under basically the same category. As is the case with many of the videos that I make, it comes from an experience I had or a conversation that I had with somebody, which I guess also counts as an experience that I had. But I was at a public range, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, and while I was there, we had a young man, probably around 21 to 22 years old, approximately, rough estimations right there. And he came out to the range and he wanted to practice his handgun marksmanship, or so it was that that he made apparent. But he very clearly did not want to practice his handgun marksmanship. Instead, he wanted to show off the Gucci gear that he had with him. So he comes up to us. There's probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 of us out there at this public range. It's an open range. Just how would I describe this range? Outside range, furthest point's like 100 yards away, but we were all doing close-up target shooting for the most part. And there's basically just this wood table under this big wooden overhang, and I mean, we were basically just burning rounds downrange. And this guy comes up and, he's like, hey, I'm going to find me a good spot to set up, and I'm going to practice my handgun marksmanship skills. All right, yeah, you go for it. You do you. No worries, don't mind us. So, before he starts even setting up, he decides to go around and show absolutely everybody, everybody at the gun range, his decked out Glock 19. And whenever I say decked out Glock 19, I mean this thing was absolutely decked. The slide was skeletonized. It had like an anodized, what would you call it, sky blue finish? No, midnight blue finish. It was shiny. It was a shiny blue and it was dark blue. The barrel itself was like this bronze color. I mean, clearly the thing had been absolutely decked out. It had a little, one of those little Glock red dots on the top, so he didn't have to use iron sights. I mean, somebody who knew what they were doing would be very accurate with a handgun like that. Clearly the handgun had a lot of effort into it, and a lot of work done to it, and a lot of money in it, and he wanted everybody to know this. I mean, literally he walked up to everybody who had absolutely nothing to do with him doing his handgun targeting. He's like, hey man, I want people to see this. I want to show this off. And I mean, I can understand it. I run a gun channel. I show off my guns all the time. I will 100% get it. So I mean, it was fun. Hey man, yeah, that's a sweet ass Glock 19, man. Let's see how it runs. So then it comes to him shooting it. He was not very proficient with how it was that, well, how would I describe this? He didn't quite know how to load it properly. I mean, he knew how to load it, but he fiddled with it a bit. He wasn't 100% certain about it. And whenever it came to actually throwing rounds down on target, I mean, once we saw him trying to load it, we're like, all right, this guy doesn't have much experience with firearms. Let's see how accurate he actually is, and let's, keep an eye on him, make sure he's safe. He was safe. Don't get me wrong. He followed all of the rules of the range, down range, finger off the trigger. He didn't load it until he was actually ready to fire. So he was safe with the handgun, but he wasn't very proficient with it. The targets we were shooting at, we had paper plates on basically big pieces of cardboard, and they were set up at 7 yards. This guy had, I think it was a 15-round magazine inside of his decked out Glock 19. And at 7 yards, he didn't mag dump, but he fired every round of that 15-round magazine, and he only made 2 hits on that paper target, and they were spread apart. They were probably about, 8 inches apart from one another. So he was not very proficient with his extremely decked out and high-end Glock 19. Once again, on camera, I have the hiccups. I do apologize for that. Now there's a very good example of the gun does not make the shooter makes the shooter. Or I guess in some cases the shooter makes the gun. You have this extremely high-end, high-quality, well-built Glock 19, clearly had a lot of work and a lot of money in it, and the shooter just was not very proficient at all. I mean, he was a good sport about it. But we had this older gentleman walk over, and he broke out one of these right here. Actually, I fully plan on shooting this, so I'm going to go ahead and put my earmuffs on right here. Oh, those are cold. It's kind of a chilly morning out, and I was not expecting those to be as cold as they are. But he breaks out one of these right here. His was a Rock Island Armory 1911, but bottom line is it was just like a cheap range toy 1911, or a cheap, one of your lower end 1911s. It was not one of the higher tier 1911s that you would see around. But he broke out one of your lower tier 1911s and he said, all right, let me show you some of the fundamentals for handguns and how it is that you want to shoot accurately, because clearly you're not accurate even at 7 yards. And this older gentleman with his Rock Island Armory 1911 put 7 rounds on target, and they were so closely together that he just made one big hole in the middle of that paper plate. Now he went about, you know, teaching and educating this young man who wanted to learn how to effectively shoot a handgun. Obviously he had basically no skills whenever he showed up. He kind of knew how to load it, he knew how to pull the trigger, and I mean, if that was an assailant, he might have been hit, but after you expend your 15 rounds. But after the guy was shown a couple of the fundamentals of shooting, he got much more accurate with that Glock 19 that he had. So that was definitely a very big perk. But the point of the story is training matters more than the firearm. The young man's training and learning how to use that extremely decked out high quality Glock 19 was way more important than the actual quality of the Glock 19. And the older gentleman's training and proficiency with a handgun, which is worlds above my own, mind you. I'm just going to say that right now. I'm going to lob some lead at some bowling pins and maybe the steel down there, and I'm not certain if I'm going to make every shot. That older man will absolutely make every shot. But he took a cheaper, I don't want to say lower or low grade, but he took a cheaper, more budget-friendly handgun, and he stacked rounds on top of one another out there. So it's not the gun, it's how you use it. It's not the price of the gun, it's how you use it. Alright, well, speaking of gun, I have my 1911 here because I do not, in fact, have a decked out Glock 19. And it is just chambered in 45 ACP, so nothing special. But it is, wow, that bowling pin got messed up. Let's see if I can make a hit on the steel out there. Aha, I did. I actually did. And apparently I'm out of ammo. I guess I didn't have a full magazine in this thing. I don't have any more 45 ACP out here with me. So there's those rounds. Alright, now this is a story of somebody who did not want to learn how to effectively shoot a firearm. I was at a different range, actually. It was an indoor range. I was not one of the shooters, but I just so happened to be there, and I just so happened to see this go on. We had a young lady who clearly wanted absolutely no instruction from anybody else because she knew absolutely everything on what it was that she was doing. She had no idea what she was doing, but she was one of those people who just decided that they could figure out anything. And she actually bought an AR-15. This young lady bought an AR-15, and there were twice. It was twice that I saw somebody there trying to educate her on how to effectively use it. But she wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. She had bought an AR-15 and was at this indoor range. Here's my AR-15 as an example. This is just an OmniMax hybrid, polymer receiver. A lot of people telling me that these are not good because they have a polymer receiver, but I have several thousand rounds through this thing. I think I'm running up on like the 9,000 round mark. There's a lot of ammunition through this rifle. It's one of my favorite range toys, or at least it was when 223 was cheap. Go ahead and put that down because I'm going to be using our laser light here. Well, not laser light, the red dot sight. But we had this lady out there and she decided she wanted to shoot her AR-15. And I knew that she knew nothing about guns because whenever she broke it out and was checking it out and getting it ready for range running, it had no sights on it whatsoever. It was one of those AR-15s that comes in the box that's set up for optics, and there's no sights on it, and she had no optic, no nothing. And she was just aiming down the sights like it was supposed to be that way. And she eventually figured out that if you pull this back, the bolt goes. I mean, she obviously knew something about firearms, but she figured out that right here is your charging handle where the bolt comes back, and she figured out that this is your magazine that you stuff rounds in. So she stuffed a handful of rounds in there. I've also got a handful of rounds in this thing. She crams it in there. It takes her a second to figure out what's going on with this thing. She actually tries cramming it in backwards just like this, and she tries forcing it into the mag well. That was painful to watch. But she finally crams it in there, and she cocks the charging handle back, lets it go forward, and then she starts going ham on the target that's downrange. She doesn't like rapid fire mag dump the thing. It's not like a situation where she just fucking lets loose, opens up like a machine gun. She takes aim on target, pulls the trigger a couple of times, and then she starts inspecting the firearm again. She doesn't clear it or anything. She just starts inspecting it again, and eventually it's to the point to where, like, hey lady, like, you're starting to get unsafe. You're waving that thing around. That's a loaded AR-15. How about we just set that down? And, like, she was very defensive on how she didn't want any help from anybody. And she also made no hits on target, which is completely unsurprising considering that she was shooting at a target, I don't know, 30 yards away approximately, and she had no sights on her firearm whatsoever. That was someone who had no training. They probably like watched movies and TV shows and whatnot and knew something about firearms and wanted their knowledge to be enough, and they did not want to learn anything else from anybody else, and it was just one of those situations. And as a result, somebody who could have become quite proficient in firearms from those around them, were they willing to learn, ended up not becoming proficient at all and are likely a little bit more on the dangerous side. Now, speaking of AR-15, I'm going to go ahead and just launch some lead downrange. Let's put some 223 right here inside of all our bowling pins. Well, that was anticlimactic. The 223 just went right through the bowling pins. Let's go through the steel down there. All right. See, I actually have an optic on this AR-15, so I'm able to make hits on target, but my goodness, that lady definitely was not. Do not assume that you know everything. I mean, I am not necessarily a professional with firearms, but I would deem myself to be more knowledgeable than the average person with a good plethora of firearms. I'm very familiar with a vast variety of different mechanics and different mechanical systems. That's what I'm trying to say here. I'm quite familiar with a plethora of different mechanical systems whenever it comes to firearms. But by no means would I consider myself an expert or a professional. As a matter of fact, I don't think I would ever consider myself an expert or a professional, because there's always something new to learn out there. The more I learn about firearms, the more it is. This branches off from something that my father had told me. The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And the more it is that I learn about firearms, you know, the more it is that I realize that I don't know about them. I mean, you can know how they work, but you don't really know how they work. Especially whenever you get yourself a firearm that doesn't work very well, and you kind of have to troubleshoot it and figure out why. That is whenever you really learn what a firearm is and how it works. Not necessarily from maintenance or taking it apart or even knowing how it fundamentally operates. I mean, even if something is just like not polished right, or even at just the slightest different angle than what it's originally intended to be, or powder charges not quite where it is that they want to be, or you know, there's a million different things where something so slight could cause reliability issues. And learning these different things about these different firearms is one of my favorite things to do. Learning what makes them tick, how about that? But I would never consider myself a professional, and I would never think that there's anybody out there who would not have the ability to teach me something, even if it's something that I'm quite proficient in. And I do not recommend that you folks out there do that. Never assume that you know everything, and never assume that nobody can teach you anything. Even the people out there who seem to be the most, well, seem to have their head up their ass, with lack of a better term, they could probably still teach you something. It might not be what they're trying to teach you. You might just be looking at them like they're absolutely crazy, and you're like, all right, well, I did learn something from you. I learned not to be like you, but I still learned something from you. There's so many different things that you could learn. Don't be the kind of person to decide that you don't want to learn, especially if it's something that you're trying to achieve and clearly know very little about. that's just one of those things that I wanted to go ahead and bring up. I think that right there was a very interesting story. I like the first story better because it actually led to a really good outcome. We had this young man. I mean, yeah, he had a Gucci Glock, and don't get me wrong, it was a beautiful, beautiful gun. It was a lot of fun having him learn how to effectively use it as well. He knew firearm safety. He wasn't like waving it around or anything like that. He was definitely safe. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more. As you can see from the car down there, I do this stuff all the time. Like the video if you like the video. Description down below has a link to all sorts of different things. What else? I think that's about it. Email sign up down in the description below. That's my just in case something happens to this channel. And that being said, it's cold out here. I'm gonna go grab a jacket. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and of course, thanks for watching. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.